UN Security Council calls on the warring parties to prevent and expand the truce. The United Nations says hunger has reached unprecedented levels in Yemen. Survived abductees from Houthi jails suffer severe physical and psychological traumas. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shahza Abdelbay. The UN Security Council urged the warring parties in Yemen to intensify negotiations to expand the truce. Council members highlighted the benefits of the agreement between the government and the Houthi rebels, and they also said some of those benefits include fuel coming to Hodeidah port, which eased the humanitarian crises and commercial flights from the capital Sana'a, in which 21,000 people were allowed to receive medical treatment and see their families. The UN Security Council members welcomed the measures taken by the Yemeni government to avert the lack of fuel in Houthi-controlled areas. In addition, it said the measures taken by the Yemeni government followed a Houthi order that affected the process for clearing fuel ships. The Gulf Cooperation Council called on the international community to put pressure on the Houthi militia to engage in efforts to reach a lasting peace in Yemen. This report has more details.
The U.S. envoy to Yemen, Tim King, began a regional tour to look at possible support for extending the United Nations mediated truce. King has intensified his meetings with Gulf, Syria and Yemeni officials with the aim to support the efforts of the United Nations envoy Hans Grunberg to consolidate the truce and to launch a comprehensive political process. In this context, the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Naif al-Hajraf, called on the international community to support the Yemeni Leadership Council and to intensify pressure on the Houthis in order to achieve security and peace in Yemen and to engage in a political solution to the crisis in accordance with the United Nations references. His comments came during a meeting with King on Monday in Riyadh as part of the U.S. envoy's tour in the region. Also on Monday, the Saudi ambassador to Yemen, Mohammed bin Said al-Jaber, met in Riyadh with King. The Saudi press agency reported that the meeting stressed the importance of maintaining the United Nations-sponsored truce and the need to reopen the routes leading to ties to alleviate human suffering. The two sides emphasized the need to reach a permanent ceasefire in Yemen in order to launch a political process between the Yemeni government and the Houthis. Also in Riyadh, the head of the Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad al-Alimi, received the U.S. envoy to discuss the latest developments in the country and the international efforts coordinated with the United Nations to revive the peace track. King praised the recent exceptional presidential and government decisions that included facilitating the entry of oil derivative ships to the port of Hodeidah, despite Houthi militia's obstacles. He also underlined the United States' keenness to support the reforms led by the Presidential Leadership Council, stressing at the meantime that there is a very strong internal and international consensus in favor of continuation of the truce. He warned that if the Houthis will opt for a military solution, they will be completely isolated. Elaborating on Iran's role in the conflict, Lender King said that the relationship between the Houthis and Iran has been mostly a lethal one, with the Iranians having encouraged the Houthis at times to launch attacks. He added that Iran has supported the Houthi militia in developing their military capabilities, and that has been very negative by fueling rather than tempering the conflict.
The head of the United Nations mission to support the Hudaida Agreement, Michael Berry, concluded a visit that included Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Jordan. Berry discussed measures to enhance cooperation between the mission and the Yemeni government and the need to take immediate steps to make progress in the mission's mandate. The United Nations confirmed that hunger in many countries, including Yemen, have increased to 10 times than what they were 5 years ago. The Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, warned that the world is facing a terrible reality against hunger.
These two countries supply about 30% of all the wheat exports globally. Corn about 20%. And sunflower oil about 80%.
The Iran-backed Houthi militia stormed a number of villages in Bayt al-Faqih district in Hudaida and kidnapped dozens of people. A local source added that the militia kidnapped about 55 residents and shot women and children, causing injuries among them. The Houthi militia committed 56 new violations on the western coast in the past 48 hours. Media sources pointed out that the militia's violations included using various machine guns, snipers, fortifications, and drones. 2 girls were injured in a landmine explosion planted by the Houthi militia south of Haifam district in Taiz. According to local sources, the 2 girls were shepherding sheep in the mountain when one of them stepped on a mine, tearing one of her legs and hands, while the other girl sustained small injuries. Abductees in Houthi jails suffer from physical and psychological traumas. Omar al-Junaid is one of the prisoners who was freed from Houthi prisons, but with a disability. This report has more details.
Omar al-Junaid, a father of 2 kids, is a survivor of the Iran-backed Houthi militia's prison camps. After abducting him in the Abu Hashim Point in Rada, the militia subjected him to horrid forms of torture in their cells. Omar describes slowly regaining consciousness in a dark room after hours of torture in Houthi custody.
They took me to a prison. For 2 months, no one knew where I was, not even my children. During that period, I was subjected to the most severe forms of torture. I was beaten with sticks, electrocuted, and hung on the roof.
Omar has endured inhumane torture over the course of a year and a half. He recounts heartbreaking and horrific acts of violence performed by the Houthi militia against him and other abductees. He states that while he evaded death, others were not so lucky.
My experience paled in comparison to some of other detainees. Some of them died under torture.
Omar's disability has impeded his way of life, and he has sold most of his possessions to pay for therapy. His children gather around him, expectantly awaiting his recovery. He laments the loss of opportunity and the lack of outside help.
The Houthis have stripped me of my future. They've deprived me of the possibility of providing a good life and education for my children. My disability prevents me from helping them. When he left prison, he was faced with a lack of job opportunities, treatment and rehabilitation. He had no source of income or housing for his wife and children.
Omar's case is one of thousands, and many remain tormented by the militia's inhumane method of enforcing their Iran-backed agenda. Their methods of torture, which include whipping and the use of incendiary chemicals, have led to everlasting injuries, devastating psychological effects, and the death of dozens of abductees.
Coming next in the news. Yemeni women celebrate more empowerment roles by the Presidential Leadership Council. Welcome back. Chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad Al-Alimi, arrived in the German capital, Berlin. He is going to discuss with German leaders the latest developments in Yemen and the international and regional efforts to alleviate human suffering and to achieve peace and stability in Yemen. Local sources in Sana'a confirmed that the Houthi militia has completed a comprehensive electronic information monitoring project. The sources added that the militia have established public service under the pretext of providing services to citizens and limiting financial and administrative corruption. The sources added that the real goal is to impose procedures, collect information, and to restrict license and transactions. The political and social roles of Yemeni women have decreased because of the war, yet the new political leadership seems to empower women in different aspects. The appointment of women in the Supreme Court is an evidence of that policy. This report has more details.
Yemen is in its 8th year of war since the Houthis took control of the capital Sana'a in 2014, and the fighting has left hundreds of thousands of dead and millions more displaced in what the United Nations calls the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Yemen was ranked bottom of the World Economic Forum's Gender Gap Index for 13 consecutive years. But despite the continuing war that the United Nations estimates has killed more than 230,000 people since 2014, Yemeni women have achieved remarkable feats in narrowing this gap. Yemeni women have voiced their pride over the appointment of the first female judge to the country's Supreme Judicial Council and demanded more action to narrow the gender gap. Only a third of women in Yemen are literate, making up less than 2% of the political process and 6% of the labor force, which according to the 2020 Global Gender Gap Index is the lowest in the world. The head of the Presidential Council in Yemen, Dr. Rashad Al-Alimi, issued a decision on August 4 appointing Sabah Al-Alwani to the senior judicial post in a country where men have always monopolized decision-making positions. Ms. Al-Alwani stated that she was pleased with the decision, as this is the first time that women are represented in such a high position in the country's history. It's one step on the path to empowering Yemeni women. Appointing women to any leadership or decision-making position constitutes a major step in the right direction. The timing of the appointment, months after the formation of the Presidential Council, demonstrates the Council's readiness to promote women's participation in senior positions. The appointment was the second in a set of reforms made in favor of Yemeni women this year. In February, in the southern city of Taiz, women successfully fought against authorities in order to overturn the need to submit their male guardians' approval to be issued with a passport. The victory saw an end to decades-long male guardianship over women that has prevented them from receiving medical care or pursuing education abroad. Yemen's society has begun to understand that women must be given equal rights.
In Hodeidah, tropical diseases have hit major places, causing increase in cases of diarrhea. This comes amid the collapsing medical services. This report has more details.
In the south of Hodeidah, people are suffering the scarcity of hospitals and medical centers, and everyone can see the distress in the eyes of its visitors, who come from the city and the surrounding remote areas to obtain the available medical services, in search of medicine for their children, who suffer from fever and diarrhea that are widespread in the region, amid a noticeable inability to confront this epidemic, which may kill the infected.
We receive daily around 200 cases. Most of them are critical ones. We need a lot of medicines to help these poor people who come from different areas.
Although the hospital provides services to patients and employs more than 50 male and female volunteers who provide tangible services in all departments, but with the widespread of diarrhea cases, the hospital is facing a real crisis as it lacks the simplest medicines and solutions.
The lab is suffering the scarcity of essential devices. We call on the health ministry to provide us with the stuff, as we receive a lot of patients daily. We are working here voluntarily for a long time without any compensation, so we call on the authorities to compensate us to have the ability to pursue work.
By the summer and autumn, and with the advent of rains and the accumulation of waste, the areas of gathering insects that transmit epidemics increase, especially in stagnant water, so that the cases of fever increase remarkably. The conclusion of this short tour: there is no treatment and no medical staff available. The patients have no choice but to relieve their pain and leave the hospital, while some are lying on the ground hoping to find someone to help them with medicine.
Here's a reminder of the main headlines. UN Security Council calls on the warring parties to prevent and expand the truce. The United Nations says hunger has reached unprecedented levels in Yemen. Survived abductees from Houthi jails suffer severe physical and psychological traumas. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.